families, that's a thing of the past now. Most people growing up in Gaza have never been to the West Bank, can only dream of seeing Jerusalem. And that's now a reality of the system of strict, hard segregation that exists. Until a few years ago, until 2005, when you had thousands of Israeli settlers in the Gaza Strip, most Palestinians in Gaza couldn't go to the beach. The beaches were reserved for Jews only. Since the settlers left, now Palestinians can at least go to the seaside in Gaza, but they cannot go beyond the seaside because of the naval blockade, which decimates another important economically and traditionally industry, which is fishing. So let me talk about Palestinians in Israel. I mentioned earlier 1.5 million Palestinians. You'll often hear, but Israel can't be an apartheid state because, you know, there are Palestinians who live in Israel and they have the vote. And blacks couldn't vote in South Africa. Some Palestinians can, therefore Israel is a democracy and it's not a racist state. So that's the reasoning you'll often hear. And it's important to look beyond that. Of course, it's true that Palestinians in Israel can vote, although the rates of voting have been declining. They used to be among the groups that voted in the highest numbers in Israeli elections, usually for parties, Arab parties, or for, there are also a couple of usually communist mixed Arab-Jewish parties. And they could usually count on electing about 12 to 15 of the 120 members of the Knesset. But voting rates have been declining because the ability to vote, as we know from our own experience, doesn't necessarily translate into actual political influence or a voice in decision-making. And so since Israel was established in 1948, no Israeli government has ever included an Arab party. Never. No Israeli government, no Israeli party forming a coalition, all governments in Israel are coalitions, has ever even approached an Arab party to say, let's talk about you joining the coalition. It has never happened. It's a given in Israel that Arab parties are not part of the government and are not invited to be part of the government. There have been, in the history of Israel in 63 years, a few token Arab ministers. I think maybe 2 or 3 in the history of Israel. But that certainly doesn't justify or make up a complete system of political exclusion based on ethnicity and religion. What you also have, I think, which is even more pernicious and not so visible, is laws that systematically discriminate between Israeli Jews and Palestinian citizens of Israel. A very important thing to understand about Israel that makes it unique in the world, unlike any other state in existence, is Israel is not a state of its citizens. We tend to think of states and citizenship as being here in the United States. No one would say the United States is perfect, but we do have this ideal that all citizens are equal, and that the rights and responsibilities of citizenship attach regardless of your religion, your ethnicity, where your parents were born, and so on and so forth. In reality, it may be very different, but that's the ideal that we can at least hold or try to hold power accountable to. Not so in Israel. That's not the case. Israel claims to be the state of the Jewish people, which means that a person Israel identifies as a Jew doesn't recognize all Jews as Jews. But a person Israel recognizes as a Jew who has never set foot in Israel, who has no organic connection to it, has more rights than an indigenous Palestinian born there who is a citizen of the state. So let me give you some concrete examples of that. So here at Oberlin, you probably, I don't know, but on many college campuses, and perhaps here at Oberlin as well, you will see advertisements for a program called Birthright Israel. Birthright Israel is funded partly by philanthropic organizations and Israel, and it's aimed at getting young American Jews to develop an attachment to Israel, to become Zionists. And basically the invitation is, come to Israel, all expenses paid for 2 weeks, we give you a tour, you see how great Israel is, and then maybe you'll come back for another program and stay a few months, and eventually maybe you'll move here. So if this program is successful, then a person who decides to move to Israel because they're a Jew will be given all sorts of benefits. They'll be given cash, what's called an integration basket, where they get cash payments for a number of months, Hebrew lessons, they might get assistance finding a job and housing, and of course they'll get citizenship.
And free education.
Free education, all sorts of benefits that are simply based on this ethno-religious identification. If you're a Palestinian, born in the country, or your parents are born in the country, or your grandparents or great-grandparents, you can't go on Birthright Israel. You're not allowed to move there. You have Palestinian citizens of Israel, many of them, who have family, who are refugees in Lebanon or Jordan, who cannot live together in the country because they're not Jews. Land. In 1948, much of the land that belonged to Palestinians was taken over by Israel and given to something called the Jewish National Fund. The Jewish National Fund, which, by the way, enjoys tax-exempt status in the United States, claims that it owns this land or looks after this land in perpetuity on behalf of its owners, the Jewish people. So it claims that this land is owned by an ethno-religious group that exists all over the world, not by the citizens of the state. What does that mean in practice? It means that the Jewish National Fund does not lease or sell land to Palestinian citizens of Israel. So these are very concrete, very consequential examples of legalized apartheid that exists today in Israel, and that are justified by the claim that Israel has a right to be a Jewish state. So what that translates to, if you're a Palestinian, is Israel has a right to discriminate against you. That's what it means to say when you say Israel has a right to be a Jewish state. So I would argue that talking about Israel as a system of apartheid is very apt, and also very hopeful, and a very positive thing, because here's the good news: apartheid can end. It can be replaced with something better. And we shouldn't see this as a threatening or a negative thing. Understanding Israel as an apartheid state allows us to understand something very important. That this is not, as some people like to represent it, an inevitable clash between religions or ethnic groups to which there is no solution or no outlet. Rather, it is a system from which people can be released. And we've seen that in our own history of Jim Crow in this country, where if you went back to the Deep South in the 1950s or even the 1960s, it might have been impossible to imagine an end to the Jim Crow system. And people talked about or justified maintaining Jim Crow by talking about our way of life. That this is a threat to our way of life. Or they talked about states' rights. To me, when I hear states' rights, it sounds a lot like Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. You can't tell us what to do, this is the way we've always done it. Well, when you start to hear the people on the other side of that, it's impossible to keep quiet about it. So, of course, I wouldn't argue, and neither should any of us be under the illusion that the United States is some liberal utopia, or that it has achieved the promise of the civil rights movement. It hasn't. If you're born black in this country, on average, you're still likely to be poorer, less healthy, and live a shorter life than if you're born white. Those are hard realities in the United States. You're twice as likely to be unemployed. More than twice as likely to be unemployed if you're a young African American. Those are hard realities of the United States. They don't say anything about individuals, because individuals can always transcend those kinds of barriers. But we cannot ignore, we cannot allow the notion that, oh, you know, anyone can dream to blind us to the hard realities that have to be challenged and confronted. But we still have in this country the notion that everyone ought to be equal. We still have the thread of that common ideal to hold us together. Although it's certainly fraying very rapidly when you look at the politics that have overtaken this country. But those are ideas that I hope you'll agree with me are worth defending. But when we defend those ideas in Palestine, Israel, we're told, oh, you want to destroy Israel. You want to throw the Jews into the sea. You're a bigot. You're filled with hate. You're an anti-Semite because you're calling for equality between Palestinians and Israeli Jews. You're calling for the same rules to apply to everyone. Those are noble ideals in this country, but a form of genocide, according to some, if you try to apply them to Israel. So it's time, I think, that we stop singling Israel out and treating it as this special case where we suspend all the usual rules, we suspend the usual analysis, and we agree to pretend that what's going on is okay or can continue. That you can have 6 million Israeli Jews living a first world lifestyle, nuclear armed, subsidized by the United States, while 6 million Palestinians in the country and several million more outside the country live a life that has reduced them to misery. Again, not because of any natural disaster, but because of a political situation that is just completely untenable. I think now, looking forward, we're in a moment where I think this is a decisive moment. On the ground, things look very solid and immobile. The walls, the fences, the sheer oppression of the Israeli occupation, the intransigence of Israeli politicians, the weakness and disunity of Palestinian political leaders and their apparent lack of strategy and vision. All those things would seem to make things very pessimistic, make us think nothing can change. I don't think that's the case. On the contrary, I think we're in a decisive moment, because the real battle that's being fought now is a battle of ideas. And it's a battle that is being fought not as much there as it is here in the United States, because the United States is the factor without which this situation could not continue. Israel knows that, the Palestinians know that, and we should know it. I want to share with you something that I read just the other day. This is a white paper from the David Project, which is a major pro-Israel. They say, of course, they talk about Palestine